Good morning, everyone. So I'm Meng Jiezhou. I'm the Research and Instruction Librarian at Duke Kunshan University. And we are very nice to have you as our panelist and our Professor Xiang Zairong as our moderator to start our first book talk. Today, now we are in the AB ballroom at Duke Kunshan University. I think Miguel must be very familiar with this environment. And so let me introduce our moderator, Professor Xiang Zairong first, and our panelists will introduce themselves later, and also Professor Xiang Zairong will introduce them all. And Professor Xiang Zairong is our Assistant Professor of Comparative Literature and our Associate Director of Art at Duke Kunshan University. And he is the author of The Queer Ancient Ways, a decolonial exploration published in 2018. He curated the Minor Cosmopolitan Weekend at the House of the Culture of the World in Berlin in 2018. And it's the editor of its catalog, Minor Cosmopolitan, Thinking Art, Politics, and Universe Together Otherwise in 2020. He's working on two projects, respectively dealing with the concepts of the dualism and the counterfeit in the global south, especially Latin American and China. Okay, welcome Professor Xiang Zairong and our panelists to start our sharing today.
Thank you, Mengje. Welcome everyone here. We have a very big room surrounded by books. I think it's a very good setting for our conversation. Here we have three guests. I will go through your bibliography, biography, sorry, and also bibliography to introduce the three speakers. Martín Camps is Professor of Spanish and Director for Latin American Studies at the University of the Pacific. He's the author of Border Crossings Towards a Narrative of the Desert and editor of four books, including Dialogues on the Delta, Approaches to the City of Stockton, A Smile Sharp as a Blade, Enrique Cerna's Writings, and critical essays on Latin America, on L.A. Ramos. He has published more than 30 articles and book chapters in Latin American fiction, and he's the author of 6 books of poetry, 1 novel, and 2 book translations. I hope we can get some of the books to our library in the future. Welcome, Professor Camps. Jie Lu works on issues of representation of the city and new urban culture in contemporary Chinese fiction and film. She is Professor of Chinese Studies, Film Studies at the University of the Pacific, the author of Dismantling Time, Chinese Literature in the Age of Globalization, co-editor of China and the New Left Vision, Political and Cultural Interventions, 2012, editor of China's Literature and Culture Scenes at the Turn of the 21st Century, 2008, and the guest editor of 2 special issues in the Journal of Contemporary China. Welcome, Professor Lu.
Okay.
And also, I hope as our library grows, we will have a big library. We hope we can bring some of also your works, physical copies to our library. The next one is our old friend, Miguel Rojas-Sotelo is an author, visual artist, filmmaker, and multidisciplinary scholar. He works on the nexus of culture, history, and the environment from an engaged, situated, and contextual approach. His recent book, Eruptions, Compressions, Contraventions, 2017, and Be Patient, Se Paciente, Artistic and Medical Entanglement in the works of Livia Posada, 2018, are a testimony of such method. He won the 2017 to 2018 National Prize in Art. He is also a professor at Duke University, our partner university of Duke Kunshan University. So welcome all of you. Should I say good evening, right, to you in the other side of the world? This is the good thing. Probably the only good thing of the pandemic is that we don't need to do this in jet lag.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Today's conversation we will discuss this new book that Professor Camps and Professor Lu co-edited, called Transpacific Literary and Culture Connections: Latin American Influence in Asia. I am someone who work also in this intersection between Latin America and Asia, specifically China. I read some parts of this edited volume. First, congratulations on the book. I really there are a lot of points that resonates very strongly. Especially with the kind of lack of attention to this very vibrant and very important cultural exchange between these two parts of the world, right? So maybe to start our conversation, I'd like to ask what brought you to this project? What is the kind of the origin, the genesis of this project?
Shall I say something, or shall I start,
Sure.
or Martin?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, because I thought it was, because I clearly remember the beginning of this project. You know, I think Dr. Camps and we got the kind of inspiration from attending the conference on East-West intercultural relations organized by Dr. Lopez Calvo in Seoul, Korea in 2017. And Martin and I believe we visited someone, and then we came back and we started to talk about this project. Particularly, you know, it's about the Latin American influence in Asia. You know, I believe I only attended, you know, this was the first time I attended this conference. You know, so I heard a lot of story. I mean, a lot of papers on Asia's influence in Latin America, but not the other way around. So we thought that was a kind of like a good topic to start. And then we also contact Dr. Lopez Calvo, and he really encouraged us, and also he agreed to include our project, our volume in his series, I believe, right? He has this series, but that series really focuses on the other way, right? That is the Asians' influence in Latin America, I believe. Yeah, so Martin and we did a lot of research. Yeah, and then I believe we haven't really found any major works, right, on this subject. Maybe Martin, you can add.
Well, first, Nin Hao, and thank you so much for having me, for inviting me to also to Professor Miguel for organizing this wonderful event. And yeah, like Professor Jielu was saying, I was hesitant at the beginning of doing a volume of that connected Asia with Latin America, because we were, like I told her, I don't speak any Asian language, and I felt like I was an outsider of such an important culture, and obviously being a native speaker of Spanish, I knew, and being a a scholar on Latin American literature, I felt that my prime rib of thinking was in Latin America, but I didn't know a lot about Asian cultures. But like Professor Jielu was saying, thanks to Ignacio Lopez Calvo's conference that he has been organizing for the last 15 years in different Asian countries and also in Europe. And he sparked me very strong interest in the connections between Asia and Latin America. And when Professor Jielu, I think she's the one that mentioned the idea of doing it from the perspective of Asia, that I thought it was a very original idea. And that's why I was hesitant at the beginning, because I really didn't think that I could, write from something that was written in Asia, besides being in translation. But she said, you know about Latin America, I know about, China and Asia, so we can do, a project together where we can complement or areas of expertise. And I think it's a wonderful experience for me to establish those connections. As we're going to see, we're going to talk probably a little bit about the articles. And so I would say that was the origin of the idea. And it was very striking to me to see that there was not a lot of research done on the connections between the culture of Asia and Latin America. There's a lot of research that has been done from the perspective of other disciplines like economy, infrastructures, and sciences even, but not on the area of humanities or the area of literature. That was the topic that we were and I scanned through the University of California, Berkeley's library, looking for some volumes. I thought it was going to be a mother load of books and essays, but I found that it was very limited, very scarce essays that were touching upon this important subject. So I think also part of this conversation here is to possibly spark more volumes like this one, where I'm sure there's going to be further research that covers that sea of that absence of essays and scholarship that establishes the connections of Asia and Latin America. Particularly now, I am writing an article for a conference, the Latin American Studies Conference, that is going to be also virtual this year. I'm writing an article on in Asian migration in Mexico. And so I'm studying I'm analyzing a couple of current cultural products, particularly a novel by a writer from Mazatlan, Mexico. His name is Juan Esmerio. He has a wonderful novel called Tu Nombre Chino, or Your Chinese Name. And he talks about the Chinese migration in the beginning of the 20th century in Mazatlan, Sinaloa. And so I studied that book, and I'm also analyzing a contemporary film that's called Sonora. And it also talks about the first intermarriages that were happening between Chinese and Mexicans in the beginning of the 20th century. So that's part of I'm continuing with this topic and learning more, about the connections between Asia and Latin America. Sorry, I think I talked too much.
Okay.
No, that was great, yeah. Martin. I think you touch upon several questions that concerns a broader picture that maybe we would like to discuss. When we encounter two huge geographical, cultural categories, Asia and Latin America, it is kind of unrealistic that anyone would be able to be specialist on everything, right? I think the kind of collaborative spirit that I can also see from the very way the volume is put together is I guess a kind of a very good method for contemporary scholars who are constantly demanded to be more inclusive, but at the same time complain that, oh, I have only so much time, I have only so much bandwidth to learn so much language, right? So I would like you to maybe speak a little more specifically on this collaboration between you and Professor Lu. How do you work? Basically, how do you work to bring two or multiple specialties into conversation in the complex way that the volume has demonstrated.
I don't know, Martin. I think, personally, I think, most of the scholars in this volume, they are really focused on Latin American studies, right? Yeah, because I guess Martin probably know more of them than I do, but some of them, I really know them. I came to know them in the conference. I think, so I think, but except the Kim, Ms. Kim, and she is probably in the Korean studies, right? So we basically contact all these scholars and ask them whether they would be interested, in this subject, right? That's the way we did it, right? And we also missed a few because of the deadline issue. Some of them couldn't really, join us. I think one of the important article I think we missed because the scholar missed. He is in the Chinese studies, and he wanted to work on the translation in 1950s and 60s. That's very important episode, right? Yeah, but I guess most of the scholars, and also we have covered international scholars, like we have Indian, scholar from India, right? Not just all of them are from US, right? Who else? Maybe Martin, you probably know them better.
Yeah, it was Professor Min Suk, like you were saying. She's a professor from the University of Texas. So she did a study on the popular culture in South Korea and how they read Mexico. And like Professor Yelu was saying, also Professor Eugenio Matibag, he presented an article about the Philippines, and also Professor Viva Maurilla, she's from India, and I think she concentrates in Spanish or Spanish literature from either Latin America and Spain, and she presented something that has to do with the readings of 100 Years of Solitude of Gabriel Garcia Marquez's and Magical Realism. So we had a pretty good array of different professors, scholars, and Miguel, Professor Miguel Rojas. I mean, he does obviously these interconnections also from the visual arts perspective. So it was a fascinating group, and like you were saying, it was complicated to try to put together so many fields and so many minds. I have experience doing only 3 of these volumes, and I have to say it is extremely exhausting, to do, to read the essays, of so many scholars, and also trying to see what is the connecting line between all these articles. So I think it is from the books that I have done, I would say that it's even sometimes more complex than a monograph, because in the monograph you have the whole you can do whatever you want and you are your own boss, but when you have a lot of different minds, different scholars, and being a co-edited volume, it is also it can be complicated in times, and so it becomes a very work intensive. Fortunately, with Professor Yelu and we have worked before, and it was a wonderful experience in having to put this volume together, and I'm very happy with the result.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And
Thank you.
I have to say that I just took another look at all contributors, and I find I'm probably the only person who doesn't speak Spanish. Dr. Kim, she's also in Spanish, right? Studies, right? In Latin American studies, yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's a great experience to work with scholars from different fields.
I think literature in translation is already a very important aspect to look at, and I guess the majority of Asian readers of Latin American literature and vice versa, they read it through translation, right? So So I don't think that's a problem in per se. I think it's a good opportunity to let Miguel speak a little bit about, because your text is very it's not only trans-Pacific, right, but also transmedial. I'd like to hear more about the vis-a-vis what Professor Martín and Professor Lu has said about this collaboration. How did you got to know these artists, thinking about writing them, and what's the working process?
Oh, thank you so much, Zairong. And to everybody there. Very interesting to have you here. And my special thanks to Helen Su, the head librarian at DKU, Miguel, of course, and Xue, my dear friend, for helping us putting this together. Actually, my experience, I think, is twofold. One is the fact that China is becoming a very good friend or foe in Latin America for the past 20 years, as China is growing in their aspirations to become a major power. The expansion and the cultural contacts are also expanding in economic fronts, in political fronts, cultural fronts too. Then there is this fascination between what we used to call South-to-South relationships. And we have to remember that there was also lots of solidarity happening during the 1950s and 60s, interest in China by the revolutionary movements in Latin America, Cuba, and elsewhere, the opening of diplomatic relations that took place in the 1950s, that came with this big wave of cultural exchange. We grew up in Latin America watching Chinese animation and early Chinese films, the Monkey King in translation and things like that, several of those, and many documentaries that came in the construction of this new China. And at the same time, many of our writers of the famous Latin American boom visited China during the 1970s, 60s, 70s, as part of this groups of people joining the non-aligned movement, and the whole translation of many of the major books of the boom happened with the presence of many of the authors there. And then we have not only Garcia Marquez, but also José Donoso's fascination with the area, or Isabel Allende's book on Chinese migrants in Chile that then moved into the US. And there has been, this imaginary. But something that caught my attention while living in China, I spent several months in 2016, then 17, and then I went to live for an entire year there and teach there in 2018-19, was how similar we are. I mean, and today is Earth Day. We are celebrating Earth Day today worldwide, and China is committed to tackle many years of environmental degradation. And for me, that was fascinating how the return to the roots, right, and the recognition of the multiple dimensions of being Chinese, right, the diversity, the demographic diversity that China has, that is becoming more and more apparent. And in Latin America, we are in the same process, right? And then there are parallel tracks, right? The constructions of nations, modern nations, that in a sense created this idea of citizenship that was a modernizing force, both in Latin America, in China, Latin America with longer historical periods, China in a more compressed, fast track kind of movement. But the processes are producing the same, right? Unified, homogeneous, apparently citizenships, models of development, ideas of nation that suddenly start to to show the crevices, the problems that they have. And one of these aspects is connected to environmental issues. And I've been working for a couple of decades already with environmental artists that work on environmental issues. And then I started to find a bunch of Chinese artists working on this front too, and working in a very parallel way as Latin American artists. Then I started to find commonalities, common ground, that we are situated in the same historical moment, even though we are very different. Then as I work with images, let me show you guys some images to start changing the pace, because that's what I do. I decided to explore and compare and contrast some of this production, right? That is a production that is embodied, right? Is writing not only in paper, but in the body, for example. Then we have in the article I wrote for this collection, these kinds of things, right? On your right-hand side, actually, many of you know about this artist because I took work from her to China when I was there. I had an exhibition there of her work, Livia Posada, and this mapping of displacement taking place in Colombia, mostly affecting Afro and indigenous subjects in this process of modernization and violent displacement due to the arrival of extractive industries. Oshinga, on the left-hand side, creating this rewriting or re-embodying the long march that is one of these foundational stories in China, right? We did this march to the Kuomintang. We can claim this is our territory, a unified China, right? That is still in dispute. Then the idea of nation, territory, the body, and the dispute about what is this territorial integrity, that this idea of nations are common ground, both in Latin America, many of the countries of Latin America, and in China. Then I move into other grounds. Then, for example, this image is an image that has struck me as one of the most powerful images in recent documentary filmmaking. Is from one Chinese film titled Behemoth, and this is at the center, in the middle, in the apex of the film. When I saw this image in front of me as an audience of this film, staying there for several seconds, almost minutes, I couldn't stop myself and say, I mean, what I'm seeing is the flag of China. This is the Chinese flag. It's a red image with some sparks there. And suddenly the image reveals this, it's the transformation of coal into metal, steel in the construction of the new China, right? And what we have is, again, this idea of a strong, long-term, but compressed transition from pre-modernity to hyper-modernity, in which extraction is part of it. And this is what we have, the result, right? It's the scars in the territory. This is not Inner Mongolia, where that film Behemoth takes place, but this is actually another indigenous territory in the north part of Colombia. It's called Cerrejón, where an indigenous community lives. Like in Inner Mongolia, Mongols are a minority within the Chinese national construction. Then another commonality, right? An artist producing cinematic, situated and contextual narratives about these kinds of issues, right? Using indigenous languages, in the case of Mongolian several artists, writers, writing about this destruction and fragmentation of Mongolia because of modernization. And in Latin America, the same, right? Through these kinds of things. Then I use poetry, right? Made and written by indigenous peoples in Latin America. This is in La Guajira on the left-hand side, and historically in China on in the Mongolian plateau, then creating this idea of territory as something that is lived by the people that are close to the land, then it's another common ground. We come from this really strong connection with the land, right? It doesn't matter where we are people of the land, and then we celebrate through words, through performances, and then through literary works, through films, and through visual arts, these kinds of things. Then Xinga is an inner Mongolian artist living in Beijing. He has been, his entire career, 20+ years, working on these issues of centralizing the experience of Inner Mongolia as a territory in dispute in China, right? Same thing happens with the work of Zhao Liang. This is part of the film, the three moments, right? The destruction of paradise, inferno, and limbo, that he actually bases on European novel of the 15th century. Then that's the kind of trajectory that I took while living there, sharing and traveling through China, and also traveling and working and living in Latin America my entire life, but also being displaced myself because I do work and live in the US. Then it allows me to look critically to this production, to get in touch with many of these artists and these writers, and to put them together in dialogue. And thanks to Martin and yeah, now I have an entire monographic manuscript that I'm working, consolidating these kinds of views. Then I'm very thankful for the opportunity to participate in this volume.
Thank you very much, Miguel, for sharing with us this very rich experience. I lived in Mexico for a year. People don't believe me, but I told them the moment I landed in Mexico, I felt that I went back home somehow. I don't know why. There is this very very strong kind of almost irrational affinity that can be felt in the air, in the way people relate to each other, right? In the kind of cultural history as well. The kind of struggle that these two parts have to deal with. The colonial modernity that we are still experiencing. So I guess this is another thread in the book that I find resonating. The kind of possibility of thinking bypassing the center, right? Bypassing the West. Between China, Latin America, or Asia and Latin America, especially through a very specific place, the Philippines, right?
Oh,
yeah. And there is a huge chunk of the book of 2 or 3 chapters on the Philippines as the kind of connecting dot. With the two cultural entities, but my question is really on the as now we get warmed up, the kind of more conceptual question as to what extent we could bypass the West when we look at Latin America. The non-indigenous Latin America, and when we look at contemporary Asia, which is which is the incarnation of hypermodernity, right? So if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, actually, I can venture one that is the deep crisis Western democracies are facing nowadays, right? It's the ugly face of democracy that was hidden under this idea of a great model, political and administrative model that brought prosperity and technology development and progress for all, right, based on the ideals of the French Revolution, that we have seen that is crumbling, right? Is in a deep crisis. We people and subjects from the South, we know it really well as colonial subjects. We haven't been able to build on the image of the West, modern nations, because the conceptual operation of a nation really doesn't match the reality of most of the colonial territories. And I think China is also facing that same conundrum. It's one of the big depths that China as a national unity has, that sometimes it realizes it, sometimes not, because it's still working very much in the idea of a unified territory under one rule and one set of rules, let's say. But then I think that this is a way to not bypass, but probably to learn, or lessons learned about the problems that Western democracy produces, the demons that it produces. And one of those is connected to environmental issues. And I'm very surprised and happy to see how China, at least in the public discourse, has taken very strong measures in the past several years towards something that they call a green civilization, to repay the ecological damage by suffering economically, or by putting a halt into economic growth that is, one of the forces of modernity, capital. We don't know exactly how it's going to play, less during this pandemic year, but there is some sort of will that somehow will bypass a hyper-modernity. Because if, we have Europe trying to lead a green revolution, we see that it's not really happening. The US is really behind. It's more rhetoric than action. And then we see really action by part of China in many fronts. And Latin America is still relying on basically its natural resources that are reaching a limit that puts the entire national projects on hold, right? Working only on the revenue of oil or mining is not sustainable because they are not renewable resources. But there are renewable resources. There are natural resources that are very, important to create another kind of idea of nation. Then I think that's one of the hopeful things that I see, with lots of problems too.
I agree with what Miguel said. And I personally think, at least, from my perspective for this book, I think we do not really just want to move away, or replace the theoretical dominance of the European or Europe or North America, simply to say, okay, this is the Latin American nature, we are the dominant. I don't think so. But on the other hand, we really want to explore and open up a new field of studies, that has been ignored by the European and North American theoretical frameworks. This is a theoretical framework. It's kind of like a perspective, right? They give you just a one way of looking at reality or literary or cultural production, because this is only so limited. So we ignore the others, the rest of it. So another thing is I think is also the rise of the rest of the world, rise of Asia, rest of the Latin America, and a rise of Africa. So in other words, the rest of the world that is not Europe or North America, the rest of the world is also the location of a knowledge production, because in the past, We only thought about the West at the real location, right? We have this Western theory, and then we apply them to the local, what we call the local incidences or the particulars. We have a universal, theoretical framework, and then we apply them to a, local, the rest of the world, the particulars. But so here we say, okay, well, regarding this hierarchical kind of like relationship, it can still yield, important meanings and the information, but we also want to explore the other routes, so let's always talk about, I mean, sometimes it's really hard. Maybe we use the global south, maybe this is also very limiting kind of like a term, but maybe we also say the non-Europe or non-North America, areas. I'm talking about. So I personally think it's more like a multiple ways of looking at, the, literary or cultural production rather than just from one way. Yeah. So I guess this is at least I had in mind. Yeah, but I agree, and I think that is also related to the, US is no longer the dominant power in the world, as we all know, even in the geopolitics, right? Because of the rest, rest of the East Asia, rest of Latin America, they all become the locale, of a knowledge production. It's rather than, only the Europe and the North American, they are the place of a knowledge production. We are just, followers. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I would like to piggyback on, on the two ideas that Miguel and Gia mentioned. Yes, I agree. As I study also borders in the context between the U.S. and Mexico, and I think that like Miguel was saying, we as we are facing environmental catastrophe, I think we need to rethink also our idea of borders. We should think in terms of planetary survival decisions. And that go beyond East and West or global South and global North. We should think more in the sense of we are in this spaceship of oxygen that we are we're traveling through the solar system. So I think I see it in those ways, in like erasing completely the borders and the oppositions of ideologies, and also like Jay was saying, it's not like Latin America that we still are countries that are in ways of developing, and China is obviously a way more industrialized than other Latin American countries, but I do think that it is a way, like Jay was saying, just to read cultural production without passing through the membrane of the West also, or passing through the membrane of the US. So we're trying to create or to open up lines of conversations where we can create a field of study that that it is that we can mention. For example, if I were to ask a writer from Mexico now, is like mention 3 Chinese writers now that are thinking about Latin America, who are those writers, and I'm pretty sure that they probably won't mention anyone, So I think we need to establish those connections. And also, to a Chinese writer, I would ask him, mention 3 contemporary Mexican writers, So I think it is important to open up those embassies of thinking, or embassies of communication, of cultural relationships and nodes and rhizomatic connections between the 2 areas and the 2 regions. So for further understanding, and also to understand preoccupations that have to do with planetary solutions to environmental issues and problems.
Thank you very much. I've been thinking, so I like that metaphor by Martín, the kind of spaceship that we are we are all, to quote last year's the early pandemic hashtag, we are in this all together, right? This kind of sense of planetary crisis on the one hand. On the other hand, if we put that as the symptom, on the other hand, the solution or possible solution, different people have different kind of proposal. One of the very influential, and I see he's also very quoted in the book, Mignolo, right? And the kind of decolonial delinking. The idea of delinking, the idea of South-South collaboration, tracing back to the Bandung Conference and the kind of 50s, 60s solidarity. My question, I guess, is to, as we look forward to quite unhelpful future, vis-a-vis environmental crisis and geopolitical tensions, how can we think of, or what do you observe in the changing dynamic between, especially China and Latin America, from the model of solidarity, of the internationalism of the 50s, 60s, to today's kind of more of a power dynamic, right? It's as I think Miguel just said, as friend and foe. How do you see as a way that now it's kind of nostalgic, to say the least, to think that we are operating still with the 50s, 60s solidarity model, right? But of course, I also hesitate to say that it's just a neo-colonial kind of relation that China has with Latin America or Africa, for that matter. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I have two comments on that, because yes, for sure, that's an open question, and there's as Latin America has been influenced by Euro North America for 500 years, there's lots of skepticism, right, and even fear of the red thread, right, the Rojas-Sotelo, right, and there is all sorts of complications there. However, saying that, I think that we are seeing something that is very encouraging, right? That is what is called like soft diplomacy. If while China is moving very strongly, or moved very strongly in financial matters in the past 2 decades in Latin America, creating lines of credit for all sorts of projects, mostly to friendly leftist nations, but not only Venezuela or Argentina, but also Brazil and even Colombia, Peru, that are more conservative, let's say, right-wing politics. Then by creating this credits, it started to work on the issues of capital, right? Then speaking to the same language, right? And when you are speaking to capital, you're speaking about credits, you're speaking about interest, right? How you're going to pay back. And many of the multilateral organizations that used to lend money to Latin America and put these countries on their knees when they have to pay back, didn't consider many of the local conditions. I think Chinese credits have been more appropriate. China has done their due diligence in creating conditions for repayment that are meeting, not only international standards, but local realities. That's one thing. The second, China has opened dozens of Confucian centers in Latin America, starting to create this cultural diplomacy, as Martin was saying. creating venues and ways for Latin American subjects to learn Chinese, to learn about traditional culture, let's say traditional Chinese culture, but to create spaces of exchange. While the European and the US, they have for granted that they have their foot on the region because of the cultural conditions. But something else that is very important is, and I've been writing my last chapter on this, that is the legacies of coloniality, to bring, one of the terms that Professor Mignolo uses, that we haven't explored that much, is the legacies of the drug wars in China, the Opium Wars, and what happened at the break of those wars in the creation of the National Revolutionary Movement, and for instance, the cradle of modern China, vis-a-vis the last 60 years, 50 plus years of the war on drugs in Latin America, also as an expression of coloniality, right? And we are in the middle of this terrible bloodshed of these drug wars that look very much as what the Opium Wars looked 150 years ago. Then there's lots of commonality in that front also that I think we have to explore because that will help to create new conditions, not only of solidarity, but real moving forward in terms of how to detach from another the colonial term, right? The link from the matrix of the coloniality of power. And in order to do that, you need alliances, you need friends, you need solidarity, you need peers to rely on. Then that's the thing. And just to, I started my article with this image, actually, I wanted to share with you, talking about the spaceship, right? Why? Because we are together into this long march. China uses this idea of the long march, right, to put everybody into the same path, right? Now the long march is taking China to, the moon and beyond. My point is that, of course, if we still have the outer space kind of long march to accomplish, we still have the long march here, right? And I think China is investing a lot on that too, still fighting for territorial sovereignty and unity, while many nations in Latin America are still suffering for issues of borders, as Martin is saying clearly. Then there is lots of commonality on this long march that we can probably try to walk together with respect and goodwill. Then, I think there are clues and opening spaces for this a new discipline in which we can start creating exchanges and start to think about each other in a more open ways, start really generating interaction that will be one way in which we, the people, scholars working on issues of culture, history, anthropology, sociology, politics, etc., can help as politicians and people in other sciences also develop their own ways and forms.
Yeah, I just add one, really, really quickly. I think it also depends on the patterns, of this collaboration between the, the structure between the two continents, China or Latin America. Because much of the essays have explored, whether, Chinese or China's role in the Latin American will repeat the same thing as US, did in the past, decades. So whether they can really have a new patterns of collaboration, I'm talking about this more I don't know, you know. So rather than just the same thing, you know, dominance or be dominated or whatever, yeah, just to try to see whether there will be a new, you know, kind of structures. Yeah, I just want to add this. Martin.
Yeah, I also, I mean, I agree completely. I was thinking about what Carlos Fuentes said, that the best way to define Latin America is not as a mestizo country, but he used the term of Indo-Afro-Iberoamerica, meaning the Indians, the Native Americans, the indigenous populations that lived in the Americas, and also the Afro-descendants that were brought forcibly during slavery, also the Ibero, the Spaniards that came and that it all composes America. But he forgot to add also the Asian part, you know, so it should be Asian, Indo, Afro, Ibero-America. That is more a term that would correspond to the Americas. I say this because Asia in Latin America is not outside, you know, Asia in Latin America is inside. We are, for example, Brazil, as I have learned, you know, from a scholarship that Ignacio Lopez Calvo has done, you know, has the second most numerous populations after Japan, for example. And in Mexico, thanks to as you were saying, during the colonial times, since the 17th century, the now de la China or the galeon, the galeones de Manila that used to transport, you know, goods and also people from the Philippines that became the membrane also to China, to Japan and to China, and bringing lots of goods and also establishing a very strong colonial, Chinese colonies in Mexico. Since the 16th, 17th century, we had you know, a commerce of ideas and also an exchange of peoples in Mexico and in Latin America. So I think I would say that we, among the two regions, the two countries, we should study those you know, cultural exchanges that had happened through history, and also to increase the cultural transactions and also the stock market of exchange of ideas, you know. So I always, when we were starting the research on this, I was looking at all the research that has been done about the regions, you know, the transporting of goods, but it was not the transport of ideas, you know, the transport of literature, the transport of film, the transport of you know, the arts, you know. So I think that's how we can establish, you know, or reestablish a new Manila galleon between Latin America and China, through the Philippines, and also just a direct, you know, tunnel from China to Mexico or to Latin America, to create, you know, a flux of ideas, to generate new ideas, and to think creatively in how to solve, you know, the many issues that we're going to confront in the next century.
Okay, that's very helpful. We have a question from the audience.
Hello, my name is Siqi, and I'm a PhD student of environment. Thank you so much for the discussion, because personally, in most days of my life, I feel there's only two countries in this world, China and America. Now I know, today I feel the Latin American is getting it's really getting into my life, because you're doing this discussion voluntarily. So I think there are two reasons why there's a barrier. There's barriers that make me feel there's only two countries, because first, there's Latin Americans speak different languages. So it's not the languages that I grew up with, it's language barrier. And I also feel that there's not much organization or people who are really like trying to advertise Latin American cultures into our lives. Sometimes we saw those pixel movies, but they were produced by America. So I'm wondering if is there any like organization or funds that aims at like promoting Latin America cultures into other parts of the world by local people instead of by Westerns or Chinese?
Yes, by living in China for a year, I can tell you that I tap into many of the embassies of Latin American countries in order to free some cultural products to create this avenues of exchange. And it wasn't easy because most of the diplomatic ties are related mostly to commercial interests, right? The expansion interest, the expansive interest of China in the region. And as the maquila of the world, as we call it, as a producer of goods, then the countries of Latin America are interested in trying to find good deals. And then, yes, I think Latin America must do better in creating these spaces of exchange. Something that is happening that is interesting is that the US is becoming less attractive for graduate students like you. It happens the same, right? If you want to do a PhD or a master's degree, you usually go to the United States or to Europe if you are a Latin American citizen of any of the 20 plus nations. However, is looking less attractive to come to the US, where I am, because all the restrictions and all the problems that this country has, right? Discrimination is just rampant, right? Racism, structural racism, poverty is going to the roof too. There are much less help for international students. Then the students are starting to explore, and China has really very well developed now a tertiary education system, great universities, great cities, and the possibility of financial help. Of course, language is one barrier, but as you are speaking English, you could be speaking Spanish, or instead of myself, trying to speak English, I could try to use better my very limited Chinese. And we can do it. I mean, we live in a world of translation, and sometimes we get lost in translation, but that's part of the learning process. And I think this book, I'm very happy of being part of this volume because it's one of the first that is creating this bridge. And by doing this exchange, we'll start opening little doors to create these kinds of spaces of encounter and seeing how similar we are.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. Thank you for the question. I think, unfortunately, always wonderful conversations have to be cut by time limit. Thank you very much for the three panelists, and thank you for starting this great project. Oh, there is a question from the audience online. Oh, it's a thank you. Okay. Gracias, muchas gracias. I maybe just add one note to what Martín said of the quote from Carlos Fuentes. Actually, one of my queens, right? Severo Sartui had this whole theory of Cuba being a nation made of Afro, Ibero, and Chino.
Chinos, yes. True.
Then that we need to probably add the Indio, right? What is called Indio. So we complete the package with two great writers. And with that, thank you very much. Hopefully we can at some point see all of you here at Duke Kunshan University after the pandemic is over.
Yeah, we hope to be able to do this more and more and to open the spaces for collaboration and research. Thank you very much, Zairong, and everybody at DKU for having us.
Thank you, Shue. That was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the people that attended.
Thank you very much. 谢谢.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.